Hey everybody, Dennis here. Wanted to do something a little bit different with this video, something I wasn't planning on doing with these videos, but I came across a book a few weeks ago that piqued my interest, and so I ordered it. I'm reading it right now. Yes, I can read, Steve. And I wanted to share some of it with you. This is a very good book called Security Professional by a Mr. Roy Wyatt. Hopefully you can see that there. And it's a book, I believe it's geared toward people wanting to get into the industry for the first time, or people new to the industry. And I really wish that I had something like this 28 years ago when I started in this racket. It would have made things a lot smoother. But that was 1993, and we didn't have LinkedIn, so I wouldn't have found it. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have anything. Anyway, let's dive into this a little bit. Just a few points. I'll keep this brief. A few things that stood out to me was the first thing he does is asks, are you right for security? How do you feel about yourself in a security role? And he asks a few questions about, you know, who you are as a person, and also how do you feel about the industry, which I thought, yeah, it's a very good question to ask yourself before you get into it. He mentions things like meager wages, limited to no benefits, minimum training requirements, and high turnover rates that have plagued the industry over the years. And in some cases that's still true. I mean, you really have to do your due diligence if you're going for private contract security. You know, there's great names out there. I mean, to let you in on how this has developed over the years, a company like Allied Universal just forked over 5 billion big ones to buy G4S. So that tells me that maybe they're doing something right. You know, that kind of growth, 5 billion, not bad. So there are developments from the past. You know, it's not something you should just look at anymore and think, okay, I saw a security guard on TV falling asleep in a chair. You know, it is more than that. Another development, one that I've noticed over the years, at least in big corporate buildings, is you walk in for the very first time, and the first thing you see is a security officer sitting at a desk. But you don't see a receptionist that much anymore. Corporate America has figured out that security guard can do just about everything that receptionist did. So, out with the receptionist, in with the security professionals. Now, I've been in proprietary since 1999. So that's where most of my experience lays, but before that I was in private for a few years. So I get a lot of what he talks about in this book. I understand it. The next thing he talks about is level of pressure. How much pressure can you deal with? Because there's going to be a lot of it. He says it may come from many different angles. And I get that, you know, and there's been some pressure in my time in security. But I'll tell you what, was I prepared for it? I think I was. What you need to think about is, in your current job or your current profession, what kind of pressure are you dealing with right now? You know, maybe it's already going to prepare you for that pressure. And let me give you a little example. My first job out of high school was at a McDonald's. And I screwed up in my interview by telling them I'm good with people. So where do you think they put me? Not in the kitchen. If you went into that McDonald's, I was at the front counter. I was probably the first person you saw, right? Now that was rough. Sometimes in the early mornings when you're opening and you're the only one out there, there might be a little rush. But at nighttime, lunches, there's a big rush too, but at nighttime when you're breaking down machinery and you're trying to wash dishes and everything and get out of there, every now and then there might be a school bus pull up after one of their basketball games or whatever. 25, 50 people. And they just come rushing right in and you're not prepared. That's pressure. So when I took my first proprietary security job anyway, and they threw me out at the lobby desk, I was waiting, you know, for large crowds. And those large crowds, 5 to 10 people at a time. So I was prepared for it. I went from 50 to 100 people in a dining room waiting on me to give them food. Angry people waiting for me to give them food. Where's my 3 Big Macs? Where are they at? And you have to really, really deal with that pressure. You can't look at that person and say, look, your 3 Big Macs will be up. And by the way, here's that Diet Coke you ordered because you told me you were watching your calories. You can't do that stuff. So how you deal with pressure in other industries can really say a lot about how you'll deal with pressure in the security industry. So think about the other pressures that you've dealt with. And then the other one that's really stood out so far, I'm about halfway through this book, but he talks about code of ethics and standards of conduct. And I'm really glad he did. Everybody, honestly, when you get done training people on where everything's at in the building, how to respond to medicals and fires and everything, there can't be enough talk about conduct. I worked with a guy in Florida who got in trouble over something, and I sat him down. He was a little bit newer, and I sat him down and I said, look, these people don't care that we check extinguishers. They're glad that we do. They don't really care about that all that much. They don't care about how many people we register at the front desk and everything. That stuff is not what they think about. But they do care about how we act while we're here. So make sure you know there's a lot of eyes on you. Behave yourself. We had another guy. I won't mention any names, but if you're following me on LinkedIn, you know who I'm talking about. This guy made inappropriate comments to everybody and just could not figure out why he was getting in trouble. And we'd tell him about this, and he'd laugh it off. And he just kept going and kept going and kept going. Most of these inappropriate comments were towards women. You know, there's a lot of women in these buildings, you know, a lot of good-looking ones. I tell new officers all the time, don't stare. Don't talk too much to them. Leave them alone. They're here to work. You're here to work. This isn't a bar. It's not a nightclub. But this guy in particular just could not shut his mouth. And it got to the point where, one, I told him, look, dude, you're going to get fired. If you keep it up, you're going to get fired. And he just laughed at me. And I said, fine. It got to a really bad point when I decided I didn't want to work with him anymore. And I was on a conference call with my supervisor and my director. This was late October, I think it was. And I said, look, if you're not going to get him out of here, I got a lot of time off saved up, and I'm just going to burn it for the rest of the year. So the 2 days a week that I knew I had to work with him, I took those days off in November and December. And I never saw the guy again because he ended up getting fired while I was off. But when it gets to that point, where people don't want to work with you anymore, they don't want to be seen around you anymore because you've brought the entire thing down, you know, this is something that he talks about in this book. You know, he talks about unwelcome conduct. Remember that phrase, unwelcome conduct. He talks a lot about that in this book. And he breaks it down, you know, pranks, jokes, innuendo, you know, verbal abuse of any nature, you know. He goes into a lot of sexual conduct here, and I wish, you know, I'm glad I don't see that guy that I was talking about anymore, but I absolutely love to mail this thing to him and say, look, this is what I was talking about, you know. So anyway, he goes over that. He also talks about things like the client. You know, if you're in private contract security, you're making a client happy, you know. Your company comes up with a contract, and you have to fulfill that contract. Whatever makes that client happy with that contract, that's your job to fulfill. And then Roy ends this book with 2 things: interview questions and an exam. This is a really good idea for a book like this. You read everything that he's put in there, and you take a little exam at the end on what you've learned. So, Roy, I hope this was a good review, my first attempt at it. But, Roy, thanks for writing this for people. I hope you write more of these things. And I give it 5 stars. It's a 5-star book, and I recommend it to anybody. So anyway, that's it for today. I've gone a little bit long. I'll see you next time. Take care, y'all.